Good evening. Let's get on with the final session, the plenary, to bring together the many strands of the last 3 days, to provide clarity, to provide an idea of what has to be done, particularly with the global governance and global design initiatives coming up in the next few weeks and months within the forum. We need to capture the essence of what has been said and the kind of conclusions and indeed recommendations which can move forward from this. That's going to happen in about 20 or 25 minutes from the co-chairs of this India Economic Summit. First of all, we're delighted to see the Home Minister, P. Chidambaram, to hear about the current security challenges which were raised by the Prime Minister 2 days ago in answer to a question from Klaus Schwab. We'd all like a lot more detail of the perspective that you have currently on the security and home affairs challenges. Minister, the floor is yours.
Nick can surprise everyone every time he takes the mic. According to the written program, I'm only a special guest, and I have to listen to the summation of the co-chairs. Nevertheless, I'll take up his request and speak to you very briefly on the security challenges. Our security challenges are no different from what faces every country of the world. Terrorism. We are alive to the challenge. We are building capacity. We are building competence. And we're building confidence among our people. Every day, every week, every month, we're adding to capacity. And we are confident that we have the capacity to face any terror threat, to thwart any terror attack, and should there be a terror attack, to respond in a swift and decisive manner. But there are other security challenges. These are largely relating to internal security. On the one hand, we have an economy that's growing at a clipping rate. We had 9% growth for 4 consecutive years. When the world went into a recession, we still recorded 6.7% growth. We hope to bounce back to 8% next year and perhaps 9% the year after. But that itself is creating deep divisions in our society. We face rising aspirations, people asking questions. Will I be displaced? Where will I be rehabilitated? What happens to my livelihood? Will I get a job? And there are ideologically driven elements, as well as simply bandits who exploit these divisions. We face those problems in a few states in the center of India, the Hindi heartland. But I think there is a growing consensus that the state must assert its authority even while it is open to talks. So we have said that the state will assert its authority, reassert its control over these areas, but at the same time, I've offered that if the CPI Maoist abjures violence, I've not said they should lay down arms. I'm too realistic to know that they will not do so immediately. If they abjure violence, we will talk to them about all issues: forest dwellers' rights, land acquisition, development, industrialization. And we have a third problem in our border states in the northeast of insurgency, where tribal groups because of their desire to protect their identity, have given rise to insurgent movements. But by and large, that is under control. And in fact, we have gained greater control in the last year. Several groups have laid down arms and have come forward to talks. We have two large insurgent groups, but we've had significant success in controlling them. This is no different from most countries of the world. Each country has its own internal security problems. It faces the problem of terror. But I can assure you that this does not affect our capacity to promote investment, promote growth. These are in pockets in India. These pockets are identified, and I think we have the situation under control. As I said, and as many of you will agree with me, luck plays a great part. Why has 9/11 not happened? The answer I was told by senior American leaders was, we've done our best, but luck has played a part too. Likewise, I think we are doing our best, but I believe luck will also play a big part, and we can stand up to any threat or challenge to our security. Can I go back?
This year marks the 25th anniversary of the World Economic Forum's engagement in India.
Rajiv Ji, on that occasion, outlined the vision of India as a rapidly growing, dynamic, and modern economy.
One of the most important things here is to meet people.
I'll be very, very precise about two areas that I'd be very interested to see progress and conversation.
We have seen major changes taking place in India and elsewhere in the world.
We have to fundamentally build new economic models that can serve a large population of people.
For the 5 years before the crisis, we did average 9% growth.
It's been great to see how the change between last year's summit and this year's summit in terms of the optimism around the economy.
Wonderful opportunity to take a look at the early parts of the economic recovery.
This promises to be a very interesting session, creating world-class education in India.
We have the financial ability to do so. We have the intellectual capital to do so, the human resource to do so.
But the real problem we're trying to solve for actually is breaking this false tension or dichotomy between quality and quantity.
And as we say, both history and geography links India and Sri Lanka.
So what you're offering is an alternative route.
I welcome you to this BBC World debate. Gender equality means 50-50.
It has to be achieved.
It is achievable if we put a lot of will to it, both corporate will and political will.
I think in the next 10 to 15 years, we should strive, and I think it's doable.
That has to be regulated. The minister will speak about it. I am against all regulations. I am for self-regulation, full stop.
The session is titled The Power Masala, Meeting India's Future Energy Needs.
And to break the whole mythology that this is what happens to poor, uneducated, illiterate people, actually the
5th anniversary of our award ceremony, where we honor the social entrepreneur of the year of India.
It is my pleasure to introduce you to the Social Entrepreneur of the Year's India.
Good morning, everybody. So to talk about trade and climate change, I've got a distinguished panel which is about to be even more distinguished in just a few minutes.
So that the signals are right, so the investments can take place.
We are connected. We have on the ground today.
Welcome to this panel on transforming urban transportation.
special guest, the Honorable Finance Minister, Mr. Palaniappan.
I have just come back from the G20 Finance Ministers Conference where
all of us have been quite reassured by what we have heard today. So all in all, I think it's a good summit.
This is, in our view, a significant development. It's only a first step.
How India can become a global manufacturing hub.
This multi-stakeholder presence and commitment reflected in your presence here is the base for the way forward.
So there, Minister, you have a taster of what's been happening in the last 3 days. But obviously there's been much more, and I think those are issues which we'll come to shortly. But can we just move forward on the issues of security and what you said, and I'd invite the co-chairs to join this discussion, particularly about building capacity and confidence, as you said. Because certainly in this India Competitiveness Review published for this conference, there is a concern reflected of a general fear of future attacks and a climate of insecurity and the repercussions for business when it comes to stability. What would you be saying to large numbers of business leaders, even after you've said that you're building capacity and confidence?
We are no more vulnerable than any other country. It's wrong to think that we are more vulnerable or more exposed or in the crosshairs of many groups. Actually, there are many other groups which target other countries than India. And given the kind of intelligence sharing that we have with several countries of the world, we believe that we have the capacity to thwart any attack. Should there be any attack, we think we have the capacity to contain it and to respond in a swift and decisive manner. Our industrial zones or industrial installations are rather well protected. We have now offered the protection of the Central Industrial Security Force to private sector installations. Our Coast Guard and Navy have built enormous capacity in the last 12 months on both the West Coast and the East Coast. Within the country, every state has increased the size of its police force, increased its intelligence gathering capacity. We analyze intelligence data every day, practically every hour. We share data on a real-time basis. And we've had many significant successes in thwarting potential terrorists in the last 12 months, some of which is known, some is not known. But touch wood, we have not had an attack since 26/11. And I think we have the capacity to ensure that no attack takes place. But I want to assure industry that we are no more vulnerable than any other country. In fact, in many ways, we are better placed than many countries because we are not in the crosshairs of many terror groups.
And the reorganization and your assessment of the structures of security in this country, Minister, which were severely criticized after Mumbai. You're a year on from that. What kind of progress do you believe you have made, both in terms of efficiency, transparency, interagency cooperation, and so on?
Well, it'll be wrong for me to rate what we have done. Others should rate us. There was an issue of India Today which came out last week. I thought Raj Chengappa was somewhere here. And they did rate us, and I think the overall rating was 7 out of 10.
Are you happy with that?
No, I'm not. I'm not. I'm never happy with anything less than 10 out of 10.
Is that achievable?
Nearly achievable. In another year, we should be at 9 out of 10 by Raj Chengapa's measure.
Could I invite the co-chairs? Would you like to engage in conversation with the Minister at all on this issue? Indra?
Well, the only thing I'll add, Nick, is that we invest significantly in India, and we think India is one of the most critical markets for the future. And we are well aware of the neighborhood that India operates in, but as the Minister Chidambaram said, we are very comfortable with the actions taken by the Indian government, and we feel exactly, as Mr. Chidambaram said, that India is as safe as any other country in the world. And we have the confidence in the administration, and we are confident about our business here in India.
Shumeet, do you want to enter this?
I think that, running a global firm, we are very clear that there are some countries that we will simply not operate in because it's just simply too unsafe for our people. But, we had people who were caught up in the middle of the attacks last year in Bombay, and I had to, of course, point out to partners who were nervous about India that we lost 3 people at the Pentagon when the plane went in there. All of our partners were trapped in a gilded cage at the Plaza Hotel in New York over the week of 9/11. The Madrid bombings affected us. The London bombings affected us. This is just a reality of business life around the world today. You hope that the state apparatus has both the preventive and the interceptive capacity to deal with these things, but you really have to learn to figure out where the risks are, be well advised on them, and learn to operate. And we don't see India by any means as being in the more risky places that we operate in the world.
Does anyone want to come in quickly before we move on to reflecting on the overarching conclusions of the meeting? Is there anyone out there who'd like to? No one at all. Everyone's convinced, Minister.
Thank you. And when you come back next year, you'll be even safer.
Is there a hand going up somewhere? Yes, please.
Georg Blume for Die Zeit, the German National Weekly. You mentioned some ideologically motivated opposition. How strong do you see this different ideology out there in the forests in India?
I was referring to a group called the CPI Maoists. We have a name for them here, Naxalites, but that may not make any sense to you. They're CPI Maoists. They believe in armed liberation struggle. They believe in guerrilla warfare. They believe in expanding their areas of influence. And, they call Parliament a pigsty. Now, the state does not accept it. We are a democratic, Republican form of government, and therefore we have to assert our authority. States are now taking counter-insurgency measures against them. We have had significant successes. We have suffered some casualties too. And we have, at the same time, offered talks to them if they abjured violence. But all this is happening in the heartland of India, mostly in the forested areas of India, where there's mineral wealth but very little industry. We think we have the capacity to gain control in about 2 to 3 years. Since I took over, states have come on board. There is now a coordinated action against the CPI Maoist. The states take the action. We provide them with forces, with intelligence, and with technological support. But I'm confident that in a period of 2 to 3 years, we will be able to gain total control over these areas.
Anyone else at this point, before we move on? Other things may come up in the next 50 minutes, but let's move on in that case, because I see no other hands going up. Let's move on now to reflect on those issues which were raised and have been raised in such detail. Let me tell you how we're going to organize this, because there is so much to get through. We've managed to whittle down the themes which have emerged into infrastructure, gender and girls, demographics and social capital, energy, manufacturing, potential, education, and technology and innovation. And what I've asked the 6 co-chairs is, could you identify the 2 or 3 which you really want to talk about, which you feel are the most important? And what we want is not a restatement of what's already been discussed on this platform and the others, but an idea of how this can be taken forward. What will it take to achieve the kind of ambitions which have been set out on this platform and elsewhere during the summit? And what I'm going to do is ask and propose we talk about infrastructure to begin with. There was a passionate discussion up here with Minister Nath talking particularly about roads and infrastructure. What I'd like to do is give you a limited amount of time, because we have so much to get to, just to give your headlines of how we can get liftoff, how the recommendations can be taken forward, and indeed what your recommendations would be on these issues. So let's start on infrastructure, and Carlos Ghosn, can I ask you what your recommendations would be on this critical issue which we've heard so often, and then we'll move on with others of your colleagues.
You want me to be short, just execute the plans. Execute the plans. I mean, we've heard a lot of good plans, just do them. Yeah, we're talking about a very monumental issue. We're talking about 6 million cars, probably internal market in 10 years. We're talking about millions of employment. This is not going to happen if the 25,000 or 30,000 roads or highways which have been announced by the minister is not done. Just execute.
Do you believe it's achievable at the rate that the ministers have been saying?
I think it's achievable because many other countries have done that. So there's no reason not to be achieved. Just do it.
Is there any one recommendation you would make based on your experiences and what you see around the world?
No, I think the understanding about the crucial decision to be taken in infrastructure is widespread. That means we heard it from the Prime Minister, we heard it from the Minister of the Economy, we've heard it from everybody. And I think the plan is right. I think it's exactly at the level of the challenge. I think the only thing, because you asked us to be short, huh? Do it. Just do it. That's what we are expecting, that just to be done. And I think growth will follow.
20 kilometers a day, 20 seconds to answer. Thank you. Right. Chidambaram, your view on what needs to be done. How will this be taken forward? How must it be taken forward?
Well, what needs to be done, I think, is just create a facilitative environment for investments to take place. Because in India, I think if you look at every different sector of infrastructure, there are certain small irritants or small issues which prevent investment from coming into and taking place. If we identify those very clearly and specifically for each sector, I think we would just create a facilitative environment. I don't think we need any big bang reforms. I don't think we really need too much of government spending alone, because there is an underlying demand for infrastructure. What we just need is, for example, what's been done in the road sector. When you say 20 kilometers a day, is it achievable? One way to look at it is to say that 5 months have gone past of the government and the 20 kilometers per day has not happened. But the second way to look at it is to say the 5 months have been spent very effectively to identify what are the issues that were irritating the investors. And a lot of them have, in a way, been cleared in the last 1 month or so. And this should accelerate the pace of investing, making the 20 kilometers a day happen.
Minister, I'll invite you to intervene whenever you want, but I've been through with all the co-chairs what they might want to talk about, so I leave it to you to intervene when you think appropriate. Bill Green.
When we talk about infrastructure, we have to not lose sight of all the elements. I mean, infrastructure is another word for the platform for growth. And there's physical infrastructure, which we talk about a lot. There's also the financial and economic infrastructure, trading, payment systems, tax regimes, governance, that are essential for capital flows and confidence as capital moves into and around the country. And the third one, of course, social infrastructure, having to do with healthcare and education. So I think we have to have a balanced initiative against all 3 of those, because every one of them is important for the country to establish the platform on which it can leap ahead.
Do you feel optimistic from what you've heard?
I do. I feel optimistic. I think that we have the physical one in our sights. I think some of the comments by the other panelists are important to getting that moving. I think we had a good dialogue about education broadly yesterday that was really important because at the end of the day, the companies or the countries with the best talent win. And I think that there's an incredible opportunity there on that. And certainly the economic one with with letting some things free in terms of banking regulatory reform, in terms of insurance markets and things like that, can unleash the power of capital to move the country forward. And I think everybody is focused on the right outcomes. The question becomes the hard work of how.
Minister, can I just come back to you, because I've seen you on this platform. I think I've talked to you on this platform in your previous ministerial responsibilities about infrastructure and your absolute determination with your previous portfolios. What is the mood within the cabinet on this? Just clarify that for us.
The mood is one of cautious optimism, because as our friend here said, the plans are fine, but we falter or fail in implementation. We are very tolerant of apathy, lethargy. We're very tolerant of free riders. I think in physical infrastructure, we should crack the whip. We have demonstrated we can build a metro rail network in Delhi ahead of time. Why can't we build 20 kilometers of road every day in India? We have to allow new players to come in. We got 2 new players to build 2 brand new international airports, beating established players. Allow new players to come in, crack the whip, and get the job done. I think the mood is one of cautious optimism.
Would you like to just underline why it's cautious?
Because we have set these targets in the past and we have not met these targets.
What is different then?
What is different is we now have Minister Nath, who's a bit of a ringmaster. I think he can...
He's got the whip, has he?
I hope. If he doesn't, I'll lend him one.
And if he doesn't deliver?
I think he'll deliver. He'll deliver better than in the previous UPA one.
All right. Would any of the other co-chairs like to come in on this point before we move on to gender and gender equality? No, at the moment. Okay, let's move on to the critical issue of gender and girls. And Indra Nooyi, you'd like to keep moving this forward. We had a debate about it yesterday, but what still needs to be done? What are the action points that need to go forward from this?
Before I get to the action points, Nick, I do want to recap some elements of that panel because I think it's important we put the issue in context. There were 2 panels, tapping into female talent and investing in girls. And just for context setting, this topic is new to the World Economic Forum. It hasn't been around forever. This is, in fact, the World Economic Forum, and to include a section on women and girls is something new. But I'm glad the WEF has included this. Both were emotional topics, and in addition to these 2 panels, there was the Gender Equality Report. Now, what was clear is this whole issue of gender inequality is a global issue. But since we're in India, let's just focus on India and the issues on gender equality as it relates to India. If you look at the Gender Equality Report, overall, India ranked 114 out of 134. In terms of economic opportunity, India ranked 127th. In terms of health and survival, India was 134th on the list. Now, what was surprising was, in terms of political empowerment, India was 24th, ahead of Australia, Canada, and the US, which means there are people who are in politically powerful positions who can do something about this issue, but something needs to be done. So maybe the best is yet to come, but clearly addressing this issue of gender equality in India is something that's urgent, something that has to be done quickly. Then I sat back and said, why is change not happening faster than it needs to? Maybe something is stopping the change from happening. Perhaps we have to educate the men that gender equality is an issue that's urgent, because India cannot progress unless it taps into all its talent. It cannot just tap into 48% of its talent, or 52%, I should say, 52% of its talent in order to grow. It just cannot grow as fast as it needs to. And I have a plea for the men. You're talking about your wife, your daughter, your mother. You have to look at it in those personal terms when you think about gender equality. do not depersonalize this issue. And the reason this whole issue hit home to me was when we had the Investing in Girls panel. There was a videotape where, I think it was your panel, Nick, I'm sorry, tapping into female talent. There was a young girl from a school in Delhi who said, when I grow up, I want to be like Indra Nooyi. Boy, it was very flattering on the one hand. On the other hand, it actually troubled me because people like Chanda Kochar and I may have raised the bar for these women, told them they can dream big, told them they could aspire for a lot of things, but we haven't created the infrastructure for them to reach these positions. So a lot more needs to be done because for people like Chanda and me, we worry about work-life balance. For those young climbers, they worry about pay parity, which doesn't exist today. For those people looking for jobs, they wonder if they'll even get a job because they're a woman. For those young children, they wonder if they'll survive beyond the first year because they don't have access to health like the men do. And I'm not even talking about those many young women who are not born because they're aborted well before they're born. This issue is a major issue. And we only started touching on it in the World Economic Forum. Yes, we had a few tactical outcomes that came, Nick, but there's a lot to be done. So the question is, what needs to be done? On the panel, we had people who acknowledged the issue. All of us agreed what the issue was, but we did not have the right people on the panel. I suggest that with great urgency, a group be convened in India, which includes people from the Ministry of Law, Education, Health, and not just confine it to Ministry of Women's Affairs, and include women business leaders, include the important women NGOs, but make it a priority issue because there's millions of women out there who are struggling every day, who hope people like those in this World Economic Forum will do something to change their plight. And I think the issue is urgent, and I just hope some action comes out of the World Economic Forum.
Chanda Kochar.
Well, Indra has summed up the discussions very, very well. I don't think I have much to add, except to say that when we were looking at this issue, we also discussed that this is no longer a nice to have or a nice to do thing, but this is an economic imperative. It's an economic imperative because companies cannot afford to miss out on a talent pool, which forms 50% of the population. Additionally, if you have women in the workforce and use them in designing your products, I think you would design products also keeping women consumers in mind. And thirdly, as you have more and more women participating in decision-making at the higher levels, it just brings about a diversity of thought process, a mix of thinking from the male point of view and the female point of view, which just enhances the quality of decision-making. So it is really an economic imperative for the corporates. Similarly, for the country, it's an economic imperative because there have been studies which have shown that today there are only 30 to 32% of the women population that participates in active workforce. But if we were to take this 30% to even 50% in the next 10 years or so, we could add 0.5% to our GDP on an annual basis. So it's no longer an issue of saying, oh, let's do it for the so-called poor girls or so-called poor women, but I think it's an issue which comes to the economic forefront. The one more additional thing that got discussed was to say that let's not only look at women, but actually let's also look at girls, because today's girls are going to be tomorrow's women. And let's look at what needs to be done, not just in economic empowerment basis, but in educating them. Because if you educate today's girl is going to be the mother of tomorrow, and her viewpoint in bringing up her own children is going to be very different. And that's how I think we will move the entire economy towards this long change process that we all want to see. Thank you.
Collis Cohn.
I think it's difficult to add anything to what we said, but I think in general, diversity is really underestimated in terms of how much sustainability it brings and how much depth it brings into the decisions, whatever decisions at the level of an entity like, government, non-profit organization, or even companies. So, asking for government to do job. I agree, obviously, but I think also at the level of companies, we need to also do our job into making sure that diversity, and particularly gender equality, appears as a source of creating more value and a source of better motivation and a source of, competitiveness. At the end of the day, it's not only a cold, this is not about a cold relation to creation value, but it's also about that. I mean, we need to present it as such. But at the end of the day, if you relate it personally, I think we had it at the debate yesterday, that, everybody has a mother, probably sisters, maybe daughters, and we need to take a look at it about, do we want to see what's happening at the level of society happening to people who are around us? And obviously the answer is no. So why we have this difference of attitude, when we are in a family environment versus when we are in a society environment? But I think companies can help, and companies can do a lot, and we should not underestimate that.
There was a sobering moment in our debate yesterday, though, when I turned to the audience and asked how many in the audience who are running businesses really understand the issue of gender equality, and the vast majority said they didn't really get the implications. Minister, that word has come up, imperative, several times. Again, I come to you and say, representing the Cabinet, how much is the Cabinet seized of this for economic opportunity, educational imperative, and the enormous potential to move forward with generating greater GDP, greater economic growth, greater opportunity?
It is. I think in the first UPA government, many initiatives were taken. The entire...
Could you just move the microphone a little closer? Could you just move the microphone a little closer, please?
The women's self-help group movement. It's a major movement in India. In fact, it is bigger than the Grameen Bank movement of Bangladesh. But that was the pioneer, and therefore it's rightly noticed more. We have over 3 million self-help groups which are run by women. Then we have this huge democratic exercise of reserving 1/3 of all elected seats in the third tier of administration, the local bodies, what we call panchayats and municipalities. And roughly now 40% of all elective offices at that level are held by women. And there's a major thrust to girls' education. We are opening special schools for girl children, especially in the backward areas, the Kasturba Gandhi School, named after Mahatma Gandhi's wife. That's a major exercise that is on. Many states are putting money into a girl child's account, which will mature when the girl child completes school or completes college. So that's a huge incentive for the family to continue the girl child in school and ensure that the girl child moves up to college. I think a number of initiatives were taken. I think reservation in Parliament, which is pending, will be a major initiative. Reservation is a blunt instrument. I know a lot of people will criticize the policy of reservation. It is a blunt instrument, but it is the best instrument that we have. I have not found a better instrument. So I strongly support reservation in key sectors for women so that you create the demand, and once you have to go out and find women to fill those places, then people will understand the driving force of gender equality.
Thank you. Let's keep the momentum moving forward on demographics and social capital. Shumeet Banerji, widening this to include gender and girls, but also social capital and demographics.
Yes, we had a spirited panel yesterday on which I proved to be somewhat unpopular because I presented some of the data around this. In effect, we have a situation here where about 320 million people will enter working age in India over the next 20 years. The problem with demographic things is that they move slowly. And as you know, if you're not represented at the table around a negotiation, your interests don't get represented particularly well. And of course, future generations aren't at the table. The real challenge with this is that its conversion to a dividend for the country depends on concerted action around human capital. and the creation of jobs and opportunities. The path is well understood, and I think our panel had a fairly strong sense of optimism about the transformative potential of the next generation. My concern around this continues to be around the inclusion, in particular when considering regional differences of the dispossessed in the mainstream of economic activity. And so, quite simply around demographics and social capital, perhaps even more than physical infrastructure, a topic we talked about a little while ago, there is a very, very large problem of execution and of really getting it done in thousands and thousands and thousands of villages all over the country. Substantial challenges around this. And just to put a bit of an edge on it, I think, really, if you look at some of the places around the world where demographic bulges have not been educated and converted into productive workforces, you have significant problems of dislocation, instability, and indeed challenges to progress. So that was kind of the tone of that discussion.
Would any others like to come in? Bill, do you want to come in on this issue?
I think it's fundamental. All these things have to go together. If you solve just one dimension of the challenge, you never get there. And how we keep progress moving forward on every front that we're talking about here is essential. And at the end of the day, one of the things that India has going for it that is unique in the world is sort of talent, right? And talent knows no boundaries, right? Talent is about inclusiveness. Talent has no gender. And I think when you have a social infrastructure that allows you to generate talent, it gives you the capability to really put distance between yourselves and many, many other countries on the planet.
Baba Kalyani, let's move on again because we've still got a lot of issues to get through. Would you like to pick up on any of this, but also take the debate and the discussion and the summary forward on energy?
I'd like to just say a little bit about the nature of the debate that was there on energy. I think everybody is aware that energy is a pretty major issue. In India, we have a significant shortage in terms of where we need to be and where we are. But the fundamental discussions that took place in the session were, you have almost 400 million Indians or citizens here who are deprived of energy. And therefore, there needs to be a significant increase in the energy capacities in the country. And when you look at this significant increase, almost 7 to 8 times higher capacity than what we have today in the next 18 to 20 years, you also have to look at what is your basket from where this energy is going to come from. Currently, India has a significant reliance on coal as the main fuel for energy. So choosing the right basket, whether it's coal, it's gas, it's hydro, it's nuclear, or it's renewables, is going to be a major issue going forward. Also, the discussion talked about the issues concerning CO2 and carbon emissions. And the consensus was that we need to take early action in relation to mitigating the CO2 issues. And the actions necessarily don't only come on the government or come on industry. The simple things that you do in day-to-day lives that can also have a fairly significant impact on reducing CO2. And lastly, this seems to be a common theme that is there in almost every panel that I have been to, and that's about skill development. If India needs to add 700, 800 gigawatts of new energy capacity in the next, let's say, 18, 20 years, it's going to need 200, 300,000 engineers who are trained on energy. And this seems to be a very, very common thread that seems to come out from this summit. And we've heard, of course, a lot of actions that are being taken on the side of building talents, creating institutes, and creating the kind of process that you need to have talent. India's talent is a big advantage, but when your growth starts getting beyond 7.5%, talent becomes the biggest shortage in growth.
Shumeet.
I just wanted to say that a striking feature of that excellent debate that Baba was talking about is when you have this conversation in China, the unit is a gigawatt, and the unit here is still a megawatt. And I think that is interesting because If you look at Chinese generation capacity plans, they will add conceivably 700 gigawatts by 2020, of which almost 300 are in alternatives, okay? And the orders of magnitude are similar in India, and it strikes me that it's time to get ahead of the curve and consider how to use that massive scale to drive world leaders in alternative energy. I mean, the fact of the matter is around solar, around photovoltaic, in particular, in storage, and in wind, the big issues are scale. And with that level of inherent scale, it ought to be that the ambition must be that in all of these technologies, India dominates. Even when you consider the importance of coal and its abundance for energy in India, 72% of generation, why shouldn't the world's leading carbon capture and sequestration technologies come from this country?
Minister, massive scale there. Could you give us some insight into the thinking again in the cabinet about raising your ambitions? You could do it here.
Well, we should, but we don't have the governance structure that is available in China. So I don't think we should run away with our ambitions. We find it difficult to add 10 to 12,000 megawatts of additional capacity every year, but China adds over 100,000 megawatts of additional capacity every year. We have problems in land acquisition, compensation. We have problems in tendering, finding the successful tenderer. We have to have transparent procedures. We have free press. We have vigilant court. We have public interest litigation. I dare say that none of this is present in China. I'm not wishing that we copy China's system. I don't. I'm quite happy to breathe free air. But given these constraints, I think we should not set our sights so high because we won't be able to achieve them. I'll be happy if we can add 15,000 megawatts of capacity every year. We found it difficult over the last 15 years, and how are we going to suddenly jump to 100,000 megawatts of capacity every year? But on scale, I agree. A number of businessmen today are dreaming very big. They have the capacity to put up world-scale plants, power, steel, aluminum, or whatever, petrochemicals. They have the capacity to put up world-scale plants. But that will require very deep and pervasive financial sector reforms. We cannot hope to fund activity of that scale unless we have very deep financial sector reforms.
We have about 15 minutes left, so I've got to keep driving this forward on what will it take on these critical issues, technology and innovation. Carlos Ghosn, the issue of technology and innovation, how that needs to be driven forward in the Indian context.
Well, I think there are many ideas, but let me mention two of them. First is the fact that India needs to play on its strengths. And there are a lot of strengths that are really very specific to India compared to any other country in the world. And these are the ones that needs to be highlighted on which you need to capitalize. Let me give you one example. I think Indian engineers or Indian product planners or even Indian manufacturers are second to none into what I call the frugal product planning and the frugal engineering and the frugal manufacturing. Second to none. I mean, we prove it every day. We know that no other car manufacturer is capable to make a car at $3,000 or $4,000. No other. I mean, you have to come to India to do that. And frankly, the car is not bad. I mean, the specifications are very clear, and the car can be very robust. But this idea of trying to, imagine the product to the minimum with the just necessary, having the engineers really doing a lot of things from practically nothing is something which is very specific and frankly very useful in a period of time where the world is looking for how to save resources and how to make the maximum out of the minimum. So I think India needs to play on these strengths. And let me tell you that it needs also some planning. I'm going to give you one specific example. India wants to be a powerhouse in terms of the automotive industry, and it's becoming a powerhouse in the automotive industry, not only because of the internal market, but because a lot of car companies need to come to India to source parts or source skills or even source cars. Now, there are some technology of the future coming in the car industry, and there is practically no actor in India. And I mentioned the fact that the battery, which appearing more and more as a very important piece of technology for the future, whatever it is for the hybrid cars or for the electric cars or even the stacks going into the fuel cell cars, we all know that we can differ about how much this is going to represent of the industry in the future, but nobody contests on the fact that we're moving this direction, because energy is a problem, because environment is a challenge. So we need to go towards more hybrid cars, etc. Okay. So when we made a benchmark about where is the technology of battery of the future, well, we found Japan, we found Korea, we found China. India is not present. Why? India has everything. I mean, the skills, the engineers, and this is not something which is requiring a lot of, natural resources. Some planning is necessary in order for the hundreds of thousands of engineers coming out of school to find a way where they're going to be able to innovate and they're going to be able to work not only of the technology of the past, but technology of the future.
Bill.
Yeah, I think that if you stand back and look at it, there's a really important opportunity to take some of the talent the country has and deploy it towards innovation. I mean, the challenges we've talked about the last few days are huge, right? And so the solutions are going to have to be bold. The world is desperate for new business models, for how to do the things we do today, how to handle scale, how to be able to do it differently, how to do it more efficiently. When you think of the services and reach that you're trying to get to the rural areas, that's going to require a reinvention of a distribution and delivery systems, be it products and services, be it healthcare, be it education, what have you. I mean, there's an opportunity for some breakthrough in defining things there. And I think this whole area of green manufacturing is another area that the country can focus on and specialize in. And I think some of those innovations that are just going to be necessary in order for India to live up to its potential are going to be powerfully differentiating, and the rest of the world is going to lust after them, because the rest of the world is in a space where it needs to transform, right? The developed world needs to renew itself, and it needs to renew towards what? And I think the learnings are going to come from the developing markets for how the developed world, continues to evolve so it stays relevant on the global stage.
Baba Kalyani, when you listen to that, let's move it into manufacturing. You have to make those critical decisions of investment and identifying those new rich areas where you can move into to adapt India and to profit from innovation. What's your response to two foreigners saying this about your environment here?
Well, I think that's exactly India's advantage. India's advantage is its ability to innovate. I think, what Carlos talked about, the Nano, there are many other products like the Nokia phone that's being produced in Chennai, or the low-cost electrocardiogram that GE makes in Bangalore. Many, many examples where I think there is demonstration that low-cost innovation can produce products with a much lower price point than what's available universally. And we talked a little bit about batteries in our automotive discussion. I mean, electric cars, the batteries are anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000. Maybe India has the ability to innovate and do something and bring the price point down. And I think that's India's advantage in manufacturing, and that's what is going to propel India's manufacturing capability forward. We don't have an advantage in mass-produced products, although in the manufacturing panel today there was some discussion about, create a model that says something like made by the people, for the people, by the people. Maybe there were some examples. The minister, Mr. Scindia, talked about what he has done in his hometown in Madhya Pradesh with the Chanderi saris and the looms there. But all those things need to be multiplied at scale. But I think India's manufacturing prowess really lies in its competitive advantage in low-cost innovating capability.
China, what about the role of banks in this? Risk and innovation, financial risk and innovation, particularly in the current climate. What can you add to clarify what kind of incentives there can be on the financial side to make this kind of thing happen?
Well, if you look at the financial services sector, again, innovation is a strength for the Indian players, because you must remember that innovation, in a way, is a necessity for Indian players. The value per transaction for an Indian bank is 1/10 of a value per transaction for a foreign bank. And therefore, it's very important that our cost per transaction is 1/10 compared to the global banks. Otherwise, we'll never be able to make our business models viable. And that has really made Indian banks innovate continuously to bring down the cost per transactions. And today, you have Indian banks which, through the use of technology and through the use of innovation, are actually delivering inclusive banking and microfinance through the use of biometric cards, through the use of cell phone technology, and bringing down the cost per transaction substantially. And I would think that if we, in a way, reverse feed some of this innovation to the developed countries, we would help those countries as well to bring down the cost per transaction. So there's a big role that the financial services sector can play. And additionally, as we talk of the economic growth within the country, again, to really have the growth benefits reach out to the smaller sections of the society, to have the money move to the smaller sections of the society, it's important to bring the cost of money transfer down and so on. And therefore, the banks have not just the strength to do these innovations, but in a way, ability to catalyze the economic growth through the strength of these innovations.
Minister, let me come to you, if I may. Technology and innovation, you've heard particularly what Carlos Ghosn has said and what Bill has said. What is the view, again, within Cabinet, within the government, on this? You've got 4 years and 8 months. You don't have to worry about an election. You've got to show, as we heard from Kamal Nath, there's an expectation of delivery from your government. And this is surely a critical area now, whereas Carlos has just said, you've now got an enormous potential advantage where you can match other developing countries.
Well, I think we are legitimately proud of a number of achievements largely driven by technology. We are employing technology for other major services to be delivered. We are using technology in a big way to deliver a unique identity card to every Indian, and that will benefit the poor more than the rich. We will employ technology to set up a national intelligence grid, which will improve our security system. We will employ technology now for a crime and criminal tracking system, which again will improve security. I'm not entirely familiar with what other ministries and departments are working on, but I'm sure that technology will play a big part. And given our successes in the field of nuclear energy, space, rocketry, some defense production, I think there is a great degree of confidence in the Cabinet that technology can be employed to drive the projects of the government in delivering services and goods.
Let me move on again. We've only got 5 more minutes to finish this segment before we close the whole summit. Bill, the issue of education, we've talked about it both explicitly and implicitly within several of these categories. Anything particularly you want to add on that issue?
No, I think that we have our sights on what we need to do. I think education is the means to the end at the end of the day. It's a means to the end in terms of providing a competitive workforce, which is therefore a competitive country. And it's the means to the end in terms of rising standards of living. You know, we have huge issues of access, huge issues of affordability, and issues of accountability. And we have to get aligned around getting access or reaching the people that we need to educate. I think it's important that we not only take advantage of the opportunity to build world-class universities, but we also recognize, and that's very vertical, but we also recognize we need to raise the water table in the tank, which is have education reach people So you can take advantage of analytical thought processes and teach people good communication skills. If you look at competitive economies, they have a broad-based, educated workforce. And I think, you know, the challenge of the next 5 years is going to be how to reach the talent that's out there in order to enable it to contribute on a bigger and a broader way to this country and to the organizations that operate here.
Let me invite you in these last 5 minutes, each of you, to give me something like a minute summary of where you think extra work is needed, where a real push is needed. What have we missed in this discussion in the last 50 minutes? Indra Nui.
In corporate America, many companies have something called the gap between say and do. I think what we need to focus on is the say-do gap, just as Carlos started. We've talked about a lot of issues. We've talked a lot about what needs to be done. I think we've got to really show progress against the actions, and I think progress has to be faster than it has been over the past few years. I know the problems are enormous, Mr. Chidambaram, and I know that the administration has a lot of issues to face, but I think the issues are growing exponentially. The solutions are coming at a fairly slow pace, and that's not a very good equation to contend with. So I think the say-do loop has to be closed a bit.
Minister, would you like to just respond to that as Indra turned to you on that? Exponential challenges, solutions are coming too slow.
No. I don't think the problems are growing at a rate faster than our capacity to find solutions. I don't think so. I think where the gap is growing is in accountability. We are not holding people accountable for what they say they will do and what they actually deliver. Organs of government are failing on the test of accountability. Someone mentioned education, healthcare. I wish to qualify it by saying it's not any education that is going to benefit our children. It must be quality education. It's not any healthcare that will improve. It must be quality healthcare. I think what we must do is enforce accountability, and if that means a number of people must make way and allow another set of people to take over, we should do that. Where we have enforced accountability, either because of the internal discipline of the person concerned, Mr. Sridharan, who delivers DMRC, or Mr. Madhavan Nair, who put satellite in space, either an internal sense of discipline, which brought accountability to the fore, that works. For most people, I think accountability has to be enforced from outside. And if we are able to enforce accountability in this country and ask people to deliver or make way, I think the gap can be narrowed.
Chandra, your quick summary. Anything else you want to add to the discussion of what we maybe missed out, or something which really needs to still be pushed quickly?
Well, you want me to summarize the whole discussion as such?
Maybe we don't need to summarize it, but anything particularly which you want to bring to our attention?
Well, I would only say that, in a way, the economic model of India is kind of getting proven more and more in terms of its strengths. But what also came out in the last few days is the fact that there are certain very imperative things that we need to do. We spoke about infrastructure, we spoke about education, we spoke about making the growth more inclusive. We talked about skill development and so on. But the one thing that I would add is that the irony is that each one of these issues can either turn into an opportunity or turn into a bottleneck. For example, when we look at infrastructure, the fact that we really lack sufficient infrastructure is an opportunity for us, because the more we invest in infrastructure, we'll add a multiplier effect to the growth of the economy. But if we do not invest in infrastructure, then we are actually going to make it a bottleneck to our growth. Similarly, when we talk of our demographics and our people, if we skill them and train them properly, they are going to be a huge asset to our economic growth. But if we don't, then I think we are going to make that into more of a liability than an asset.
Shumeet, anything you want to add quickly?
I'd just say two things. I think it's been hugely invigorating, but I suspect somewhat less than my appetite for focus on executional efficiency and how that will happen. In particular around, in my view, the need for urgent reform of the legal system as well as of local administrative delivery machinery. The other point I'd make is an externally facing one. I think the crisis has brought India squarely into the global table and a place at that global table around a range of the major issues. Apart from the content contributions, I suspect India has a big role to play in contributing to that debate in one important sense, which is India is a microcosm of the world, is a big fractious place that somehow finds ways to get consensus and progress. I think there are very clear examples of large-scale sectoral success. The world's big problems are all multilateral. They're game theoretic in the sense that what's good for me is not collectively good for us, and they are intergenerational. India is good at solving at least two of three of those aspects of problems, and that kind of thinking is what we need, because we're not going to break through in Copenhagen without some new way of thinking about these things.
Baba Kalyani.
I would put two issues on the forefront, apart from what everybody is talking about, execution. One is education. I think that's an issue that just needs to get urgently resolved, whether it's primary education, whether it's secondary education, or whether it's higher education. It just simply needs to get resolved. The second factor, which we didn't see too much discussion in this sessions, was governance at the state level. We seem to have a situation where we are beginning to see an improved governance at the central level. And as Mr. Chidambaram very rightly said, accountability needs to be put in. And we had some good examples from Minister Kamal Nath when he talked about how he is bringing accountability in his system. He talked about in land acquisition. In his third meeting, he got 3 people to just go out of the system because they were not meeting their targets. But governance at the state level is something that urgently calls for attention, and something needs to be done.
Thank you. Last words from Carlos and Bill, and then I'll invite Robert to come up and close the summit. Carlos.
No, I will not add anything. I think, execution, we have discussed a lot of good plans. I think people understand the issue very quickly. The plans are ready. We're just going to have to spend, we should have spent a little bit more time into how we're going to execute certain things which are important. And I would add also the fact that the minister adds something that, frankly, we did not come at all in the discussion, but which is important, is about the accountability.
Thank you. Bill.
To raise its sights. I think you need to be more demanding. I think you need to raise the bar. What it took to get from where you were to where you are today is irrelevant. How things get done today is irrelevant. The world is moving too fast. The opportunities are too great. And I think as a country, and all the institutions that make it up, that we need to be more demanding and have higher expectations of what we're going to get done and the speed at which we're going to get it done.
Thank you very much. Co-chairs, thank you very much. Minister, thank you very much indeed. Robert Greenhill, Managing Director of the World Economic Forum, to close the summit.
Thank you very much, Nick. Honorable Minister, distinguished guests, well, what a fantastic 3 days. And I couldn't think of a better way to have celebrated the 25th anniversary India Economic Summit. Clearly, if I were to summarize in 2 words what came out of these 3 days, it would be optimism and impatience. In fact, the two are clearly linked in the conversation we just saw now. And a real sense of impatience to transform India and to have India actually help transform the world. Because really the 2 dimensions of this global issue came out in the last few days. The one was the world within. How to move India up from the 6.7 to 7, 8, 9, potentially now 10%. How to, reflecting the Prime Minister's personal passion, transform the education and health systems in terms of access and quality. How to actually have men and women together help bring about the social transformation of the role of girls and women in society. And actually, through doing this and other actions, India be involved in helping to transform the world without. India now taking such an active lead role on the G20 table, going from opposing views that were being imposed from outside to proposing new views and new models, and within the business community, providing new technologies, new mindsets. And yet, what the interesting thing was over the last 3 days, while there was much that was new, Carlos Carlos Ghosn and others noted some of the things that were essential and actually anchored on fundamental values here. The concept of frugality, the concept of equality. To quote Bhagavad Gita, I look upon all creatures equally, none are less dear or more dear to me. That sounds a lot like the Gates Foundation's view that every life is equal value, whether it's in terms of having access to education or access to the right to equal use of CO2 emissions. So in fact, through the kind of conversations we were talking about here, we're not just talking about how we help transform a country of 1 billion, it's how do we actually bring about a transformation of a globe of 9 billion? And how do we go from thinking about a stable, sustainable, prosperous world with 9 billion in it to a stable, sustainable world with 9 billion prosperous people in it? That's a huge mindset shift. But it's something that's taking place here in India. It's something that actually is a lesson to us all in the world. And I think with a sense of impatience built on a sense of opportunity, next year will be an opportunity for us to see how much further we've come on this. But at this point, I have the pleasure to thank Minister Chidambaram, Minister of Home Affairs, but also to thank the Government of India more broadly for the very frank and open and interactive conversations about the possibility and the challenges of really moving things forward. I'd also very much like to thank our great partners, represented by Banerji, the Director General, and Venu Srinivasan, the President of the Confederation of India Industries. We've had a marriage that's gone for 25 years, and it's a good marriage, and it's constantly renewing itself, which is perhaps the best kind of relationship to have. I'd also like to thank the co-chairs, because it was obvious from the conversation down over the last few days, they brought not only insights, but passion, which is what's made it so animated and I think so successful. I would also like to thank Sushant Parakurti Rao and the team here that represented equally a commitment to India and a commitment to the mission of the forum, which is improving the state of the world. And I'd like to thank you all for your honest, interactive participation, because what we try to do is improve the state of the world by bringing diverse views on common issues that reflect our common humanity, and I think we did that. And now I look forward to welcoming you next year, when we'll have a more prosperous, more secure India with 7,300 kilometers more roads. Thank you very much.